Okay, welcome everyone to ACDE number 166. So we have a lot of basically PR updates, reviews, and then there was some process stuff around the whole EIP ERC conversation, and then naming, just a shout about naming the next upgrade. I guess maybe to start, does anyone want to give an update on the state of Denkun devnets and implementations?
Yeah, I can go with that. We still have Devnet 7 up and running. We're updating the tooling a little bit, but BlobScan is supposed to work now. The issue is that it took so long to get it working on our infra that we've already started expiring the old blobs. Like the first couple of days of blobs have expired, so we can't index the beginning few days, and BlobScan doesn't support starting indexing at a later stage. So we wanted to ask which clients already support like an archive mode, and I think Teku already messaged with the flag that they use. So we're going to be doing that, but we can't do anything about Devnet 7. So we're going to have that for Devnet 8 onwards. Besides that, we did a tiny shadow fork of Sepolia this week. It doesn't really mean much because there's a very small subset of clients there, but it already brought out maybe 1 or 2 bugs in Genesis that that we'll deal with, and we're still getting the tooling up, so we'll do like a bigger analysis of how things are going, how blobs perform there, and stuff like that over the next couple of days. And I think in terms of the next DevNet, the first step is getting Hive and getting all the client images in Hive. So only then would we start planning DevNet 8.
Awesome, thanks. Do any of the client teams want to go into detail about some of the issues or they might have seen on their ends or like progress that they've made? Okay. If not, I believe we have the 4844 call next Monday as well, so we can also spend time there and yeah, dig into the details and next steps around DevNet 8. Um, I'm I'd be curious to hear also from client teams, has anyone started implementation on the rest of Dencun EIPs? So obviously 4844 is still the main one, but like what's the general status for yeah, for other ones? Marek?
Yeah, so from Nethermind's side, we implemented all of EIPs, and only we haven't merged yet for 788, but it should be merged soon to the master.
Nice. Andrew?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm on holiday this week, but I'd like to say that we still are catching up on 4844. So hopefully next week or maybe the week after we'll be able to finish with 4844 and pass the 5 test. We've implemented a couple of other EAPs, I think 1153 and one other with M copy. Was that M copy? Yeah, I think we have the beacon stake route in progress, and yeah, I don't think we've done this self-destruct yet, not yet. But my question would be which EAPs do we want in in Devnet 8, like all of Cancun EAPs or maybe a subset besides 4844?
I was just on vacation as well, so my memory might be a bit old here, but I believe we said we wanted all of them. But Perry, maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, we wanted all of them, and F4 posted a tiny link with what all of them means, like which commit to target, etc.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh. Okay.
Justin.
Phase 2 is making progress on the stuff for 8. We have the beacon route in progress. We already have the updates to receipts to include data gas use and data gas price. However, I just noticed that that PR has not been merged in yet. So if we could get that finalized, that'd be great. Yeah, so pretty much the same status. Oh, the beacon route stuff is in flight as well.
Also, M copy is in, T store is in, self-destruct is pending, specification clarification, but otherwise ready to go in.
Awesome.
On Ethereum JS side, we are sort of ready with the Devnet 8 spec, just a small PR that is pending regarding to fork choice update 3. And also with respect to that, I mean, I opened a simplification PR, which I would like to talk about regarding, again, the engine API method for new payloads.
Cool. Let's cover that right after we finish the client updates. I don't know if I think Geth on the EL side is the other one missing. Anyone from Geth want to give an update? Okay. And yeah, on the CL side, yeah, don't necessarily want to put you on the spot, but if anyone has updates they want to share, we can definitely cover those as well.
For Lighthouse, we've got the Devnet 8 spec implemented. We're just in the process of reviewing it right now.
Nice.
So Lodestar is also almost ready with DevNet 8 spec.
Nice.
And the Tego side, we are ready. The only thing that we are implementing now is the new publishing API for supporting the broadcast validation option, but I guess it's not super important for running DevNet 8 in any case, but this is the only thing that we are working on.
Got it. Anyone from Nimbus or Prism on the call? And okay. Anything else on the DevNet implementation status? Otherwise, we can move to Gajinder's PR.
Just
Yeah.
clarification. Should override builder flag, I guess, should be added to DevNet 8 spec.
Yes, that's what we talked about on the consensus layer call last week.
Okay.
I can't remember if we talked about it on the execution layer call before. So it can easily be a no op, but it should be in the intervals.
Cool. Mario, I saw you had your hand up for a second.
Yeah, just a small update. We have tests ready for obviously 4844 for DevNet 8 and 6780, which is self-destruct almost ready. MCopy is ready also, but we're still working on 4788 and transit storage tests, but should be ready in the following couple of weeks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Gajinder, do you want to talk about the parent block root engine API PR?
Yep. So basically in new payload, what's happening is that the payload that is coming from beacon node, it now doesn't has parent beacon block root, but then there is a separate param that comes with the parent beacon block root. So EL basically then can marry it to create the full payload. But what I'm trying to propose is a simplification so that the beacon blocks execution payload itself should have parent beacon block root so that there is one-to-one correspondence between the data that is on the beacon block as well as the execution block that gets constructed out of it. So it is basically helpful in the scenarios, mostly in the scenarios of debugging, where basically we are debugging something, we want to construct, we want to run a block, execution block, and we just want to extract data out of from the beacon block. And so basically, of course, we can still marry parent beacon block root from there, but I think it is quite handy and also quite clean that parent beacon block root exists as part of the new payload that we get.
So there's a couple things here. Like, you could either change the consensus data structure or just change the engine API, so which would require some more translation in like constructing the data structure when calling that method. We did, as I linked to in the consensus PR that you opened up, we did debate this before doing the release. It ultimately came to kind of an aesthetic sensibility. Do you duplicate this field and thus have kind of this internal data structure self-contained, or do you gather it from the outer commitment? We landed on don't do the duplication, and some people thought, okay, well, that's okay, but it's aesthetically nicer for it to be self-contained. If it's actually a pain debugging and the aesthetic principles have been elevated to more practical principles, I think it's totally fine to cut another release with it. We're going to have to add a few tests. There's an additional line of code in the validation to make sure these two things are the same thing. but ultimately, I think it's fine if consensus devs or others want it in there. We didn't have too much of a reason in either direction before the latest release.
And does anyone on the EL side have any thoughts on it? Okay, so
I guess they do the same, because the longer we don't do it, like if we have a Devnet with this in there, then people are going to create tooling for the workaround, and then all of a sudden it's going to be worked. It's like the longer we have it, the more people are just going to figure out how to deal with it. So I'd like to figure it out soon.
And I don't know, there's a couple CL teams on the call now, but not everyone. Like, can we maybe, is it too long to wait until next week to like have it fully agreed upon?
Yeah, I'd wonder when Devnet 8 is, because doing it before Devnet 8 would be preferable to doing it after.
Right. I guess, yeah, okay, two questions. Perry, maybe, okay, let client answer his own question, so only, like, do we expect to have Devnet 8 up before the CL call next week? I would be surprised if so.
I think I highly doubt that.
Yeah.
I think realistically it'll be the week after.
Okay, so if we got pre-signal on this call and from the PR from everyone else before that call, and essentially on the same day cut the updated release in 1 week time, would that be okay, or do we want to try to expedite the decision asynchronously?
Yeah, I think let's. Go ahead, Perry.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say I think it'd be okay to like expedite the decision async, because it is sort of just an aesthetic change, and it's just like requires like a little bit of legwork, I guess. My 2 cents is it is nicer to include Gajinder's PR and like add the field, and makes it like a little bit easier. But I haven't been implementing this. It's been Mark, so he had a little bit more insight than me.
Okay, thanks. Can we just does any other consensus layer team have feelings either strong or weak in either direction? And then I can knock on doors after the call to see if we get positive all around. We'll try to cut a release more like Tuesday to unblock this and keep moving. But yeah, if anybody has a vocal opinion, please say so now.
Okay, I guess there aren't. So yeah, let's try to get some feedback on it async, and at the latest, finalize it on the CL call next week.
Thanks.
Sweet. Next up, Dano, you had a clarification PR about the self-destruct EIP. Do you want to give some context on that?
Sure. So as I was working through implementing it for Besu and integrating it with the execution spec tests, 3 corner cases that weren't really clear in the EIP were discovered, and this EIP makes them explicit. These are currently reflected in the execution spec tests and in at least Besu and I think other clients that are following it. The first of the 3 items is to separate the notion of contract creation from account creation. Now, this is a situation where you would send money to an address, and I call those hollow addresses. You don't know whether it's externally owned or a contract. So that exists prior to the transaction. So you start the transaction, you do create to into what that address, turns out that address is a create to address, and then you self-destruct. In that case, I think the spec should self-destruct that address because the contract code that's going in the storage didn't exist prior to the transaction. So that would basically separate the notion of account creation from contract creation, and what 6780 tracks would be contract creation. When you actually call the create operation, or if you actually started in a create transaction. So that's the first clarification that's reflected in tests right now. The second one is there's a corner case where you can actually burn Ether with self-destruct. If you self-destruct and you set yourself as a beneficiary, currently that Ether just completely disappears, because by spec, the last step is to set the balance of the self-destruct contract to 0. So this would change so that you only destroy Ether if you're destroying a contract in the same transaction. So if a contract existed prior to the transaction, and you did the self-destruct, and you point it to yourself, all of your balance would stay in your account, so it wouldn't self-destruct it. Now we can't get rid of it because it turns out optimism depends on this feature, and they do depend on the in-transaction create and destroy loop of a smart contract to burn the Ether, and this is in their L2. So there are people out there using this feature. We can't just get rid of the burn feature. So that's not something that I don't think is good to do right now. The final step is to say that self-destruct always halts the current frame. I think that was an oversight in the first one. That was always the intent, that if you do a self-destruct into what's going to be like the new sweep mode, that the execution then halts at the end of that self-destruct. So that just puts in a line, clarifies that. The tests have always reflected that. So that's just worthy of clarification. So those are just 3 things that are, you could argue that those were the correct behaviors, but it's much easier just to put those into the spec and say, no, these are the correct behaviors, and to make it clear. Can optimism not just activate the EIP?
So I guess before we go into the optimism discussion, I just want to clarify, are the first and third bullets just you're clarifying the current semantics, and then the second bullet is one where we may want to change what the current EIP actually does?
The way they're all 3 of them, I think, are clarifying current semantics, because the second one is really an emergent property, because the burn comes from the set to 0 only in the internal transaction. So I think that if we were, that doesn't really represent a change. If we were to change it, I would say that it would fail for self-destructs to self in a transaction if I were to change it and get rid of the burning. So I would say that all 3 of them are clarifications of semantics, and those are the most likely interpretations. But based on readings, you could get different readings of it. The halt, I think, is absolutely needed as a clarification, because I think the best reading is that it does not halt.
Got it. Okay, so there's some comments on like the burning. Aside from that, does anyone, and we can cover that after, but does anyone have any comments or contentions on the 2 other points? So the contract versus account creation and the halting the call. Does everyone agree that those 2 clarifications make sense? I guess if you disagree, now's your chance to raise that. Okay, so I guess on the destroying one, yeah, just for context, because this was posted in a previous, it wasn't posted on this EIP's thread, but on the previous self-destruct EIP's thread. So I believe that sending, like self-destructing and setting yourself as the beneficiary is how at least Optimism and maybe other layer 2s basically manage withdrawals back to L1. So how they destroy kind of supply on L2 as they send it back to L1. And there's a bunch of comments in the chat about this. And it's not clear, it's not clear whether this is like a major deal breaker for L2s or not. But yeah, and I guess, yeah, Mario has a comment saying, if we rename the opcode to send all, it's kind of weird if you send all to your own address that they would then destroy the Ether. That seems, yeah, unintuitive. Yeah, any thoughts on how we should approach this?
So the opcode wouldn't be send all when you're within a transaction. It's still a self-destruct if the transaction exists. So we can't go there yet. So if we get rid of the self-destruct for a contract created in the transaction, then it truly becomes send all.
Okay, does anyone not think we should make this change, or do people feel like they need to look into it more to better understand?
So the
Yeah.
change would to be never to burn. Or are you proposing we change it so it never burns?
Okay, so the current implementation now would still burn it, right?
Yes, the current implementation and tests
Okay,
check
burn.
for burning.
Okay.
So table the burn for 2 weeks and let people think about it. With the alternative being rewrite it so that it never burns. And if you self-destruct a self in the same transaction, will it leave a hollow account, or will it leave the data, or will the self-destruct fail?
Yeah. Mario?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify my comment. So on the test right now, if I think it follows exactly what Dino proposes. So if it's in the same transaction, it still destroys the ETH. But if it's in different transactions, the creation and the send all, it doesn't destroy the ETH. And in my opinion, that's how. That's the semantics that sound more, in line with what the opcode name describes. But yeah, I don't know what other people think.
Okay, so clearly not a ton of reactions. I think, yeah, it's worth looking into it a bit more. I've reached out, I sent your PR to some folks on the optimism side, Dano. I think we should reach out to other layer twos as well. And maybe, I don't know, hopefully by like the CL call next week, we can at least have a good view on like, does this is this like a deal breaker for any of them, and go from there.
Okay. If we do a change, I'm going to write this in chat. My recommendation is we would leave a hollow account with state and notes deleted if we delete in the same transaction.
Yeah, sounds good.
Other than that, it's currently tested for how it's described. So
sounds good. Any other comments, thoughts on this? Okay. Next up, had an execution API PR. I think, Light Client, you brought this up, 438 get blocked receipt.
Hey, so there's 3 PRs I wanted to talk really quickly about into the execution APIs. This first one here, adding this new method, ETH get block receipts. I understand some clients already have something kind of like this. It seems that there's been like generally positive feedback on Discord and on this GitHub issue for adding the method to the spec and supporting it. Basically, I'm just trying to ask if there's anybody who feels strongly against not going forward with this. Or weekly against not going forward with this.
Last chance. And there's some base use support on the PR as well. So
Yeah.
oh, Nethermind in favor as well. Okay, let's do it.
Cool. So let's go ahead with that one. I'll merge it after this call. The next issue is 430, and that is a request to move the mining related ETH RPCs. So right now you can check there are 5 still in the specification, and these are ETH mining, ETH hash rate, ETH get work, ETH submit work, and ETH submit hash rate. They're not really used anymore for post-merge related things. I'm curious if client teams feel okay with us removing this from the spec. This doesn't say that you have to remove it from your client immediately if you have networks that you still want to support, but generally it seems like something that we don't need to have in the like canonical Ethereum spec.
Okay, yes, remove. Okay. do it.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. All right. The last one is 297 in the execution API's repo. This one has been around for a while, and we've been toying with some different ideas. Ultimately, the goal is to improve the UX for running execution layer clients and consensus layer clients on the same machine. So today, you have to kind of negotiate outside of the two clients as the user of the clients where you're going to save your JWT token, generate that JWT token, and then kind of point them both into that direction. These PRs are sort of trying to figure out a way to improve that where the user doesn't need to try and coordinate across both of the pieces of software, like where this token is going to live. And this was the original proposal that I had come up with, was just coming up with some sort of default location and some order of precedent for reading and potentially writing the JWT token there. I'll let you take a look and review like what the exact locations are, but we went down this path, and ultimately I think Jacek made a proposal to have a fixed JWT token and only allow the fixed JWT token to be used if you are binding the engine API to your local host. We went down that path for a while and decided that ultimately we're kind of relying on some browser security properties of not being able to do cross-domain requests to local host as like the kind of like securing property of that system, and it seemed a little bit brittle. So I've kind of like come back now to this default file path method and trying to just reinvigorate the interest in making this happen. So I'm curious like if client teams are interested in supporting this. If so, any comments? Maybe, if you're not interested, also important. Lucas?
I have a question. Would there be any potential issues with accessing this path? Because and on different OSs. So, for example, on Windows, I'm not sure if you have by default access to roaming app data of not for your actual application, right, that you're running. And this would be like cross between EL and CL. So like question mark about the access paths and access rights to the paths.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure on that for Windows. I don't know if anyone knows off the top of their head if that's the case. Would need to look into that. Enrico?
Yeah, we have been discussing this morning about this, and we internally, and the TLDR was that for us it was kind of weird that we have a spec that starts describing things so in detail that are so related to operating system stuff, and you end up having these issues like, do in Windows by default you get access to this directory, or what if the user gonna use Docker and you start having other level of complexity, and then spegging out these details there becomes a little bit off from
Yeah, that's fair. Originally, when I proposed this, I used the must terminology, as in this was like a hard requirement for clients, but we stepped that back to more of a may, like clients may provide this functionality. And I think it is useful if we decide to like move forward with something like this to have a relatively simple spec about like where can clients negotiate on this location. If it's too much effort to implement, then this is a choice for clients. But I think ultimately like this is a problem. Like outside of the exact implementation of how to deal with this problem, negotiating the JWT token is just a silly thing for users to have to do on a single machine. And we should come up with a better way. I don't know if this is the end-all way, this default path. I'm happy to like find another route. But yeah.
Another consideration that we were doing is that maybe this kind of complexity will be gradually kind of simplified by the tooling that overall come up for home stakers to just help things set up, and these kind of details will be kind of hidden by using these tools, and might be that this kind of complexity were initially there practically for when we were close to the merge, but then time passed by, users get used to it, and a lot of tooling around this complexity will, yeah, abstract away this stuff. I don't know.
I mean, even just for myself, I would love to not have to deal with this. And I think users aren't really getting better at running clients. They just stop running clients. So I don't know. I think that we can do a lot better about making it easier for people to be running our software. Okay, generally it seems pretty mixed. So that's the takeaway.
I think just having a default value for the location of the file is fine, as long as we are not enforcing the user to always locate the file at that place. Then, and if the user does not specify another path for where it is, I think having a default value is a good option. I don't see why anyone would object to having a default value, or how it would affect the user experience in a negative way to having a default value, even with the tooling that already exists with the existing complexity. Since they already specify that location of the JWT file, they do not have to deal with any regressions caused by this change.
Right. I think the point Enrico was making, and correct me if I'm wrong, was just there's more effort on the client side to deal with these different default locations, and it adds some complexity, like it does.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, you may start having more interaction with end users that assume that it's gonna work, but then for their system that don't work, so they start. Yeah, there is much more support around this thing, and then you fall back to say, okay, please explicitly pass this information. That the JWT path explicitly there to fix it. So, but I agree at the end that a default value seems like cannot make things worse actually.
Okay, it sounds like we don't really have enough quorum to approve this time. I would really like if more client teams could weigh in on the issue, and we could try and iterate a little bit on it and get it to something that people are generally happy with.
Yeah. Barnabas had a nice comment as well, saying that with Holsky, it's going to force each client team to run multiple set of nodes, so people will experience the pain personally a bit more. So that might be.
I think the client teams already run nodes.
Not enough.
Yeah, you heard it.
A NUC in every household.
Yes.
10 NUCs in every household.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, and people can continue discussing like the specifics on the issue, but I agree, it seems like we might want to get a bit more inputs before moving forward with this.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll merge the first two PRs. Thanks a lot for the feedback on this one as well. Cheers.
Okay, next up, so there's two related, I guess, proposals. So EIP 7329, which is the EIP ERC repo split. We've discussed this on the call, I believe 2 calls ago, and then it kept discussing it on EIP IP. And then, Dano and Lightcline put this together, and I think Greg Colvin, I'm not sure if he's on the call, but had a proposal to EIP 1 that addresses some of the issues around the process. But maybe, yeah, light client Daniel, do you want to give some context on this?
The context is to affect what we decided a month ago. And this EIP just formalizes it in a way that is acceptable to the EIP editors. It outlines the alternatives considered and the objections. But I don't consider my opinion changing on it that we want this full separation, we want full governance split. And that's what we had agreed on, what the all-core devs wanted a month ago. So that's formalizing this process.
Cool. Does anyone else have comments, thoughts on this?
Do any core devs disagree? Do any core devs want us to stick with one unified EIP repo?
Okay, so this seems pretty clear. I don't believe Greg. Oh, you are here.
Yeah,
Okay, great, perfect. So yeah, do you want to talk
yeah.
about your PR and yeah, your point of view?
Well, not all of us are on board with it as it is. I can't really review the big PR because it touches 924 files. So some of us feel this is major surgery that we want to consider. My EIP, it'll probably get split. Some of it are, I hope, uncontroversial changes about things that people have complained about that don't require this split, which is things like our link policy is way too tight and people don't like fighting with that, and other issues of that sort. The bigger thing it tries to do is to clarify what parts of the responsibility and workflow belong to the developers and what parts are editorial. I think they've gotten mixed up, and so we start wanting to split the editorial repos instead of saying some of what we want to split shouldn't be there in the first place. So I think a lot of the trouble is just that we're trying to track EIP status in the editorial process. The editors don't care about whether it's CLI or not, or CFI. If it's considered for inclusion, if it's going on the test nets, that's entirely development workflow. So my EIP just tries to separate that to create essentially two-side repos where all of the ERC editing gets moved into one repo, all of the EIP editing gets moved into the other, but the current repo stays the same because that is the working repo where the editors do their main work and actually publish. It's horribly cluttered because people check in a draft and then all of the editing on the draft is going on in that repo. And for ERCs, that's a huge amount of churn.
Does this imply that there would be a single repo where like all the drafts get merged into? So there's like a ERC pre-draft repo and EIP pre-draft repo, and then they both get merged into this common repo? Or is it more that this common repo hosts things like EIP1 or whatever, like high-level process stuff, but then there's an EIP's repo and an ERC's repo, and that's where all the activity for each side happens?
It could work like this. A draft gets checked in to the existing repo. The bot says, we have a new draft here. I'm going to put a PR, maybe automatic merge, but at least a PR over on, say, the core repo, the core directory in the EIP repo that's off to one side. So now there's a draft there, and further editing happens over there as the working group iterates on that draft. At some point, that draft could go to CFI. And when its status changes to CFI, the bot can then put a PR back on the main repo and say, hey, this one's gotten to CFI, so we'll make a note of it. So the main repo only contains the major changes in status, and those major changes are defined by the working group. In this case, the core developers say what their status is. They don't have to tell the editors. We don't care. And so this, I think, splits off the work in the ways that the work is actually done and lets the editors manage their repo in the way that's best for us to do our own work and publish final documents, which is our real job, is to get to a final document that actually describes the protocol. And to support work in between, but not to get in the way. And we're just in the way right now. And I don't think the split gets us out of the way. It just doubles the problems. So basically,
I think the split does get the editors out of the way because it gives all core devs final jurisdiction over the items it wants to do. And this process set up with this working group and the second editor group, I don't think gives us final jurisdiction. It still provides the ways for editors to be in the way, and if one person to stand up and say, I veto this, or to keep a spec from going to final because we have some little nit wrong with particular formatting or process of one particular thing. The big advantage I see of this split is it gives the all core dev side of the house final and total jurisdiction over how they do their processes and what they publish. And that is what I want more than anything else, is final jurisdiction in this meeting.
That's what I'm trying to do. For a working group should, and already does, have at least one editor in the working group. And I would say that that editor should have write permissions. And if the working group wants to push it to final, the other editors back off and just say, you say it's final, you want to merge it, it's your PR, do it.
But that's not the experience we've had in the past. There was a networking PR where we said this is final, and an editor that was not in the working group from outside the working group came and said, no, you have to go through the process of a 2-week. Because the other editor still could go in, we've seen these happen in the past. Right. I don't want it possible for someone outside of all core devs to come in and say, you have to do that. So unless those editors are given complete and total jurisdiction, I don't see how this solves this without it actually being a full, formal, total split. A working group is just, moving the deck chairs around.
Very clearly, I want to get rid of those stages. There shouldn't be a last call for core EIPs. There shouldn't. But I don't want to rehash this discussion. We have the EIPs on the table. We have discussion threads both on the Magicians and Discord. So that's where to take this up. I'm just saying this is controversial. You can force the merge if you want, but you'll be forcing it through controversy on the editor's side. And if you force it through against controversy on the editor's side, you will do damage. And I don't think the split is necessary to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. But I don't want to spend this morning rehashing years worth of arguments here.
I mean, there's a way where we could eventually get to that even with a repo split. So I think clearly, there's strong support for the repo split. We just, had no objections again. And it probably makes sense to go forward with that first. And then if we find that there's some, core set of overhead, the obvious number, the obvious thing is just numbering. But if there's more than that makes sense to live in a common repo, maybe after we sort of create a sort of EIP meta or EIP editors repo or something like that. But
please let the editors try to come to a consensus. We aren't there yet. We don't have a consensus on this.
Sure, but that means, you personally could block this decision for another year if you wanted to.
Look, Victor strongly opposed, but has said he will not block. I'm strongly opposed. I'm blocking. I've said that I will remove the block if we finish this whole discussion and have a reasonably coherent plan that doesn't risk splitting the editorial organization into two organizations. And that if I cannot remove my block, I'll simply remove myself as an editor and allow the other editors to do what they want to do.
But yeah.
This is the nature of the consensus here. We probably can't get unanimity, but I'd sure like to be closer than one editor strongly for, two editors strongly against, and others in the middle. Let's take a little time. We've got solid proposals on the table to discuss. We're not going in circles.
But I just think your block is kind of, there's like some fundamental thing here where if the reason to split out the ERCs and EIP process is like each side has more control over how they do things, then of course the editorial is going to be split out because, the editorial in the long run is probably going to be quite different. And maybe a single person can choose to like sit on both. And I believe at least some of the current EIP editors want to do that, but it's going to be two different processes. So just like fundamentally, it seems hard if we actually want like the benefits of splitting the repo, which is we can tailor both sides of the process to like the users of the process and the main stakeholders, then from an editorial perspective, you're going to have to change things as well, because otherwise we'd all be happy with the current process. Like the fact that we feel there's some constraints as part of the ERC process that make it harder to do EIP work is kind of the root of it.
Yes, I want to fix that. I don't believe that the current split proposal is the right way to split things.
Right, and I guess
Look, I'm sorry. We're editing technical English. It's all the same. It's technical English. It has the same spelling, the same grammar. The only form we're imposing is we really want to see an abstract. We really want to see a securities considerations, and we really want to see references. And we're handing over to the core devs what references are allowed, what sections in between the abstract and the security are allowed. And I would propose that, yes, if the core devs say it's final, publish it, the editors will back off and say, it's your EIP, you're telling us to publish it despite our misgivings, we will publish it. To give the core devs plenty of control, but not say we need two editorial organizations to manage stuff that is not editorial. I don't see, I keep bringing up the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. They've been managing all of the IP and more protocols for 50 years now, maybe 60. They have one editorial organization with one head editor. They've never felt the need for multiple editorial organizations to manage all the different processes. They simply give a lot of power to each working group to manage their processes and keep the editorial work minimal. I think that's a good model for us. I don't think making up another model that's this complicated, I just don't think it's the way to go. But I think we can meet the actual problems and fix those. And I'd like a chance to do so.
Right, but again, I think the set of core devs and like everyone on this call sort of has already moved past this. So I don't think blocking the split is the right approach when, at least.
What else can I do? I totally disagree. And if this split goes through, I will need to leave because the organization's values will have diverged from my values. And I believe the values of those who set up the organization circa 2017
Well, I think there's a.
This is,
I think if
you
you
know, what
care
else
about
can I
the
do?
consistency of the editorial process, you know, waiting to see how the split goes, even if you disagree with it, and then potentially trying to find ways to like make things more coherent at the editorial level if there's room for that. Like I think, you know, that could be an approach. But
Yeah.
given we've discussed this for, you know, first many years, but also many months recently, and there seems to be like extremely strong support from the core development and research side across both the execution and consensus layer. I think we should continue to work on the split. I feel like, you know, we asked like 10 minutes ago if anyone had objections, and there doesn't seem to be. So,
I thought my objections
I mean,
were,
sorry, from the client
no,
teams.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think, look, if you disagree with this at like a fundamental level and don't feel like you can engage with the process afterwards, I
The
I
split
think,
is major surgery. There's no going back to what we had from the split.
well, you can
It's
always
huge.
add. I think I disagree. I think if there is actually like a set of common things that like need to happen across both repos, and like yeah, numbering is one example. But if there's like more of those types of things, then you just add an EIP's meta repo or EIP ERC's repo or whatever EIP coordination. Like but my view is like from the client teams, from the research teams, and like everyone I've spoken to who's like deeply involved in proposing changes on the protocol side, the split is what they'd like to go forward to. And I think respecting that and, you know, potentially trying to find ways to make things better afterwards is like an approach where you can probably get some of your changes as well. Like, and I haven't like fully reviewed your PR, but like just skimming through it, I suspect a lot of the things you propose there are things we would want on the EIP side of things. But you know, the difference is like which repo does this end up being written in? And I think the strong preference from all the client teams is they want a separate repo that's focused on core EIPs, and this can be
Yes.
part of that.
Yeah, I'm proposing a separate repo, but I'm not proposing creating that either the ERC or an EIP repo. Don't create that by essentially cloning the existing EIP repo and trying to clone the existing process.
Right. It's sure. So then you're saying you've got like a blocking objection on basically an implementation detail where most of the client teams effectively disagree with you. And
right, but it's the editorial team that has to live in these repos.
But again, like part of the argument is like why we want this split is client teams do not live in these repos right now because they feel like they're not set up for them.
Yes.
And the thing we want to get out of it is that, yeah.
Yes, I'm proposing that there be an EIP repo separate from, separate from the editorial repo. That there be a developer's repo for the purpose of managing EIPs. But I would like it to start new and empty, and then going forward, we start working in it. It's much easier, requires no surgery to speak of, and if we really like that, more stuff can be migrated into it as we want to. So I think it amounts to a good piece of the split to work with, but not trying. My hugest objection is no, I don't want to split the editorial processes. I don't think that things like link rules and spelling and grammar need to evolve in different directions. I just think the editors need to back off to editing and let the core groups take care of developing and specifying what they develop.
Dano, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah. So a lot of these things in the EIP one pain relief, they're not mutually exclusive. We can still do every single one of them.
Yes.
And the one commentary I want to say is that a lot of these ideas have been discussed but never seriously considered until the moment the split was mentioned. And so there's a bit of the Overton window shift. And it's that having to threaten to leave and to split things to get work done is not healthy. So if we had final jurisdiction on this, we wouldn't need to work. We would know and control our final destiny. And even that little bit of asking the editors to back off, there's still the final step. We don't have full autonomy in the process, and that is what is essential in this split.
That's what I'm offering.
I guess, does anyone else have thoughts on this? Or
I'm offering that the core devs have the power to merge final EIPs, no matter what the other editors think.
There shouldn't be an editor group to think about it. We should be our final owner of it.
Okay, that's okay with me too, but I don't see the objection to letting the editors check the spelling and grammar and check that all of the links are actually live links.
But the thing is that the split does not stop this, right? The split makes this happen in two different repos, and I think again this is like the preference that's been stated many times. So it's, I don't know, I feel like there's a pretty strong like preference from the client developer group of how this should be done technically to accommodate their workflows, which in practice doesn't really change, you know, how, like what modifications we can make to the process. So yeah, I don't know, based on like this and the other conversations, I would be like, I think we should probably move forward with the split, consider your suggestions as part of the like new, or I don't know, like separated core EIP focused repo. And I think like, yeah, if that's a way to get more clients to engage with the process, then that's great. And if there are things we can do after that to help the editorial side, we should obviously do those. But I think holding up the entire kind of transition that people are like pretty strongly in favor because of some objections, because of like some objections to the form on your end seems, yeah, that seems wrong.
This repo modifies 924 files. I can't review it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think like client did the PR, but I assume most of those are just like links and naming changes, right?
I don't know. I can't review it. GitHub can't show me a table of contents. Anyway, there's an editors meeting next week. We can take this up as editors next week.
Yeah, but okay.
And I'm sorry, blocking is part of the consensus process, and deciding that my block is solid, but I'm not going to change my mind.
Sure, but that doesn't mean everyone else has to stop moving forward because of your block.
No,
right?
They don't.
Yeah, and I think
the editors are free to move on without me, but that's true. But this is how important it is to me, and it's a hill I'm willing to die on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know. If there's,
I'm trying so hard to give everybody what they really need here, and this is on the basis of, God, at least 30 years of experience in standards groups on how they go right and wrong. So this isn't coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone feels like this makes them reconsider whether we should split. This is probably the time to speak up. Otherwise, I think.
Okay. The editors can take it up next week.
No, but yeah, I'm mostly curious to hear about client teams because. Yeah. But yeah, last call, I guess, to voice objections. And yeah, so I guess in terms of next step, then yes, you can obviously discuss it in the editor meeting and discuss the specifics, even just also around like reviewing the PR and the script and whatnot. But I think from like the client team's perspective, it seems pretty clear that we want to move forward with this. And I think it's helpful to also have EIP, what is it, 7329, that like lays out the specifics. So I'd encourage client teams to review that as well as your PR, Greg, so that there's probably a lot of these suggestions that we would want to pull in to the post split repo.
7329 is in last call until the end of the month, so please comment.
Cool. Okay, last thing I believe we had on the agenda, just a quick shout. There's an ETH Magicians thread about finding a name for the next upgrade. So Prague and Electra, the two options proposed first are Petra and Electra, and then Ben in the comments says he wants to die on the Prague Electra hill. I don't know if we want to discuss this now or just leave it on ETH Magicians. Yeah, any thoughts on this? Okay, let's use each Magicians. Anything else that anyone wanted to bring up?
Cool. Could I bring up
Yeah.
339 block version 3 endpoint for Beacon API?
Yes, please.
Is this something we want to include in Devnet 8?
Any comments from client teams? Have people had time to review it? Okay, if there's no comments here, I think we should do and then everyone has PRs. I was gonna say, so for the blocks version 3, I think we should try and do like for the other PR we mentioned, get some consensus async in the next week and make a go no go decision on the CL call. Alexei, I believe your PR is like similar.
Yeah, just small PR about error codes and general cleanup for loops. Well, if we can consider it for inclusion too, or immersion, it would be cool.
Does anyone have thoughts on this PR? Okay, I think what we should do as well, so let's discuss them async. I'll make sure to add them to the agenda for the 4844 call next week as well. So people have in a couple days to look at them before then. Yeah, and we can make a call at the latest on the ACDC call next week about whether we include them in Devnet 8. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks everyone. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
See y'all. Enjoy Paris.
Bye.
Thank you.